Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Power and Policy, a podcast by the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council, speaking truth to power about the issues affecting Muslims in Canada. I'm your host, Janelle Massa. Islamophobia in Canada is skyrocketing. Hate crimes against Muslims have risen 94% since 2023, and Islamophobia in schools spiking 400%. That's according to a new report from York University. From October 7, 2023 to March 5, 2024, organizations received over 1,000 reports related to Islamophobia or anti-Palestinian racism. It's an average of nearly 7 cases per day. All the while, the Muslim community is watching in horror and agony as Israel carries out its genocide in Gaza. Our special guest today is Canada's first ever special representative on combating Islamophobia. Amira Al-Wabi joins us here in studio. Since her appointment in January 23, she's led national consultations, advised on government policy, published the Canadian Guide to Understanding and Combating Islamophobia. But it also raises the question as to whether the government and this new office actually has helped made Muslims in Canada safer, or if it's simply paying lip service to our community. We're going to be asking all of those questions today. Also joining me in studio is Khalid El-Khazaz, the Executive Director of the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council. He'll be joining in on the conversation a little bit later on. Thanks to both of you. Amira, thanks so much for being with us. So you've been an advocate for a big part of your career. You've worked for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. You've been with the Canadian Centre for Race Relations. This role that you're in now was newly created when you were brought into it. Can you tell us a little bit about how it came to be and its purpose, its goals and mandates?
Well, thanks so much, Janella, for having me on the show. This office was born out of terrible tragedy, as many of your viewers are going to remember. The Our London family terrorist attack, where we lost 4 members of a single family on June 6th, 2021, was really the impetus. Our communities had already suffered a previous massacre in 2017 in Quebec City, where we lost 6 worshippers, 6 Quebec Muslim men who were at a mosque praying and were deliberately gunned down by an individual who was consumed by hatred for Muslims, wanted to quote unquote protect his family by going in there and shooting everyone. In 2020, there was a volunteer caretaker right here in Toronto at the IMO who was stabbed to death by an individual as well who is believed to have been influenced by far-right information and the ecosystem. And then, of course, the 2021 tragedy and massacre of the Afzal family. So from there, our communities, rightfully so, had long been ringing alarm bells about the rise in Islamophobia in this country that was impacting our well-being and our safety, the safety of our kids in schools and university, etc. And that was really a turning point in the sense of saying to the federal government, enough is enough. We're being killed. Canada now has the heartbreaking distinction of having had the highest number of Muslims killed in deliberate attacks in any other G7 country. And so with all of that, a host of recommendations were made by our communities to the federal government and to all other levels of government as well, including the creation of this office. And so fast forward to 2023, this office was created. I applied, like many other Canadian Muslims applied to the position. I was appointed, and the mandate is quite broad. The mandate really covers a vast sort of territory of work that covers providing advice and guidance to the federal government, raising public awareness about Islamophobia and its impacts on our society writ large, as well as really thinking about how we reframe the narratives about who we are as Canadian Muslims in this country. How do we rethink of the ways in which we have been portrayed and how that has continued to harm not only our communities, but democracy itself. Because when we see our communities targeted, we know that that's really undermining the sense of inclusion and cohesion that is a right for every Canadian.
You just listed off a long list of horrific events that led up to the creation of this office. But in the intro there, I also read off a number of stats, startling stats to the current situation. 94% increase in hate crimes since 2023, 400% increase in schools. You mentioned that Canada being the highest, having the most deadly Islamophobic attacks in the G7 in the last 7 years. And at the same time, you've recently called, Canada a global leader in combating Islamophobia. How do you square those two things?
Well, the sad reality is because of the fact that our communities have been targeted so much, it has actually forced the conversation in a way that was never happening before. In fact, as many of your viewers will remember, even after the Quebec Mosque Massacre, there were anti-Muslim rallies happening across this country. Our communities have been fighting tooth and nail, even to have Islamophobia itself as a phenomenon that impacts us recognized. And in fact, we had within the political class those who were deliberately weaponizing the term Islamophobia to further fuel hatred against our communities, suggesting that to bring the term Islamophobia and to address it was somehow creeping Sharia, an effort to introduce blasphemy laws in this country, an effort to take over. The narratives are many and ridiculous. And so we have seen that consistent resistance in Canadian society to address this, but it took the killing of not the first massacre in Quebec City with 6, not even then, not the killing in Toronto, but it was when the family was out for an evening walk. Many of us remember those times. We would go out, it was COVID times, and they were simply, being together as a family member, and you had a grandmother, a mother, a father, a daughter, all deliberately killed by an individual, consumed by these narratives. And that was the moment, heartbreakingly so, that we had the wide understanding that Islamophobia is not only real and impacting people's daily lives, as a Senate report would find a few years later, but that it can kill people. And so when you think about the price we've had to pay to get to a place where not only the federal government has recognized Islamophobia, has a definition of Islamophobia, where European counterparts are still seeing resistance that we had here to even talking about a definition. The same Islamophobic pushback is happening in Europe about this. We're ahead in the sense that we've recognized it and our office exists. We're one of 2 in the entire world. There's another office like this in Australia. And because of our office, we just published a comprehensive guide that you mentioned in your intro, that unpacks what we are talking about when we talk about Islamophobia, the stereotypes, the myths, the media narratives, the Islamophobia industry. We're the only government in the world that has published that. It's not to say there isn't a whole lot of other work done, but it is to say that we have had to force this conversation and we've had to take on that leadership. Otherwise, we're going to really disappoint the values that we say that we cherish in this country around pluralism, around human rights, and dignity for all people.
At the same time, though, it's not just outside actors that we're talking about when we're talking about Islamophobia, because we've also seen decisions by the government or inaction from the government. I think about the Liberal government failing to challenge the Quebec religious symbols ban that impacts not just Muslims, also Sikhs and Jews. I would go so far as to call that state-sanctioned discrimination. So what work is being done by your office, and maybe how difficult it is it when you are in an office that you're appointed by the Liberals, but you're also having to combat some of the things that they either have acted on or not acted on?
Well, I think it's important to make a clear note on Bill 21 and that legislation and that policy. So that policy has, in fact, now gone up to the Supreme Court of Canada, where it will be soon heard, and where we have the federal government committed to intervening on that case on the side of challenging the use of the notwithstanding clause to override our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which include freedom of expression and freedom of religion. And so to that point, I would push back against the idea that the federal government has not taken a stand on that, whether it's sufficient or not, certainly open for discussion. However, they have made that position clear because it does go to the core of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so if anyone is going to stand up for those rights and freedoms, it should be the federal government, because ultimately, if we are to say that we are a democracy, if we are to say that we are a country that believes in human rights and the rule of law, then that means it has to apply to everyone, and that second-class citizenship has no place in our country. And it was, in fact, a Quebec court judge that looked at Bill 21 and described it as quote-unquote cruel and disproportionately impacting not only Sikh and Jewish and others, but specifically disproportionately impacting Quebec Muslim women. And so I think that it's very evident and it's very clear that that is a direct threat to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That's why the notwithstanding clause was used. So I think it's very important to talk about that, and I think it's very important for our communities to be very alive to this conversation, because if we cannot defend those charter rights and freedoms, then it's not only our communities that could see their rights up for grabs, but it is other communities that have seen and will continue to see those rights that we thought were enshrined really not be worth more than the paper they're written on.
You've had a chance. You have a chance, all the time, I suppose, to meet with the Prime Minister. You've met with previous Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, current Prime Minister, other ministers. What are those conversations like? How easy or how challenging are they? As I mentioned, when you're in this, appointed role, you are maybe in a challenging spot. What do those conversations look like? And are you able to challenge them? Are they receptive?
I think what's absolutely critical to those conversations is to continuously demonstrate that I'm engaged in community and that what I'm bringing forward, it's not my opinion as Amira Al-Gawabi. I am here as a champion and an advisor and listening to what communities themselves are saying. So when I'm in those rooms, I'm very much carrying with me what I'm hearing directly from people who are living with, whether they're watching what's happening in Gaza, deeply impacted, they have relatives who've been killed. I've raised many, many times how we have members in our communities who've lost upwards of hundreds of members of their families, and how, while my mandate remains domestic, the impact that even foreign policy has on us here at home is real. And so when I'm in those spaces, because I continue to engage those conversations, I demonstrate that I'm bringing forward community expression and feeling, that I'm not the only one bringing those to those rooms, because there are members of parliament across this country, there are ministers who are also hearing from our communities. And so on that note, I am only echoing or amplifying or bringing again and again forward the same views that many of our communities have been so deeply engaged on, particularly over the last 2 years, where we have seen an incredible amount of engagement. We've seen that CMPAC, NCCM, other organizations encouraging people to be engaged civically, to make sure that their concerns are brought forward. That's the role of our office, is to be a bridge to continue to not only make sure those voices are heard, but what are the policy changes or what are the policy steps that we need to take to actually implement real change to address the systemic barriers that people are up against.
You brought up Gaza, an important topic that is so present in the minds of so many Muslim Canadians in particular, but so many Canadians. Can you talk more about the concerns that you've raised in this area to the Prime Minister, to the government? There are so many different kind of areas related to this. There is the brutality from police against peaceful protesters. There is, the issues with folks trying to bring family members from overseas and issues with the visa programs. What conversations are you having with the Canadian government about these issues?
So I have been engaging with not only, as you mentioned, I met with the Prime Minister a few weeks ago. And in fact, I encourage your viewers to go to our website, sign up for the newsletter so that you stay updated about what I'm doing, what I'm saying, because you'll also see readouts from meetings with Prime Minister Carney and previously with the former Prime Minister. So I try to be as transparent as I can to ensure that our communities and fellow Canadians across the country, this office is really a Canadian office. This office is here not only to advocate for our communities, but to advocate again for our shared values. So when it comes to Gaza, I can tell you that I have convened and made sure that members of our communities, particularly Gazan Canadians and Palestinian Canadians, have had an opportunity to meet, for example, with IRCC officials. I've been part of many conversations around the programs that have been set up, and many have been very, very concerned about. I have raised those concerns to the immigration minister several times in pushing forward and amplifying what people are worried about. I raised it and mentioned it as well in my recent meeting with the Prime Minister. So my role is, again, to make sure that in those rooms, in those spaces, that these issues are not forgotten, they're not left off the table, and wherever we are able to provide specific policy advice through research, through engagement, that we are doing so, and help to advance and push forward those files. But what I do want to make sure that your viewers and all of us understand is my office, while it has an important place within the federal government, it cannot be the only place where these issues are being raised. The strength of this office really lies on the engagement of our communities. And the fact that our communities continue to engage has been very, very important, because if it it winds up being just our office talking about this, it can be easily ignored. I'm there to provide advice. They decide whether they take it or leave it. So when our communities are engaging on the other side, saying this is what we need to see, and our office is amplifying and ensuring that how we see that, we're figuring it out together and we're communicating that together, that makes the impact. That's where we can really make a difference.
Some people may feel, look, the government has failed us on this issue. And, how could someone like you, that someone like you shouldn't stand next to, the prime minister or, because of their failings on these issues. What's your position on that? At what point do we, kind of decide how much we're going to engage or be a part of the office and how much we're going to fight from the outside as advocates?
Well, I think it's really important that it's not a zero-sum game. We are all here with the same goals in the sense of ensuring that Canada upholds its promise to be a leader on human rights, advance international humanitarian law, stand up for that at home and abroad, and that we really do put our money where our mouth is, that we make sure that it's not just lip service that we talk about pluralism and democracy and human rights, that we actually see change. And where our communities feel that there's a failure, and I've certainly expressed that, and as I said, I'm not the only one saying these things. Communities are saying it, members of parliament are hearing it, ministers are hearing it, so everybody knows how our communities are feeling right now. We're writing op-eds, we're speaking in media, we're talking about this. If we step back in any one part of this effort to push for positive change and push for, again, we're not asking for special treatment. All we're asking is for equity, human rights, and the upholding of international humanitarian law. That's all that Canadian Muslims and their allies and people across this country are asking for. So for all of us, that means all of us do what we can in the spaces that we're in. Absolutely, to the question is there any moment where you say, you know what, throw up my hands, I'm just going to walk away, I'm going to keep fighting from the outside? There are lots of people who are fighting from the outside, and what my office does is it creates a bridge to officials directly, to speak to heads of departments. We speak to people who are working within the bureaucracy. We hear what public servants are going through, and we try to advocate for them. So just to give you a few examples, what does that look like? It means that we've helped to ensure that there's a module on anti-Islamophobia training within the federal public service. It means that publicly we've issued this guide on Islamophobia that describes anti-Palestinian racism, the only government document that does so. Very important that we recognize this form of racism that we've seen such an explosion in. It existed before October 2023, but of course we all know how it has simply become a daily reality for far too many. We have been engaging with law enforcement, with universities, with other levels of government, with mayors, etc. So at this time, being in this place where we can have some influence matters. And it only matters so long as our communities see the value in it. The moment that our communities say to me, you know what, just stop. Like we don't feel that it's making a difference. Honestly, I will take that into great consideration because I'm here to serve our communities. But I can tell you that what I actually hear from communities, particularly after the launch of last week's report on the Palestine exception that came out from York University, in which our office contributed to, I have actually heard a lot of appreciation for the efforts that we're putting into this work and for the efforts that we're putting into making sure that our communities are seen, that the fact that Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism and anti-Arab racism have really skyrocketed and gone through the roof, that we are making sure that that remains part of the public discourse, is not erased or made invisible.
Do you worry, though, about being tokenized, about being used by the government to whitewash their actions or their inactions?
Well, I think it's a very valid question. I think anyone that I've spoken to, even who works within the federal public service, is asking themselves every day, because absolutely, human rights experts, human rights organizations have called what's happening in Gaza a genocide. So anyone who's involved with the government wants to see more action to stop the starvation, to stop the killing, to ensure that there's humanitarian aid for Palestinians, to ensure that Palestinians have freedom, have dignity, have all the things that they deserve like anybody else. So many people are questioning themselves in any type of system, in any type of organization. And so I think we all have to do that soul searching. How can I use my skills, all the work that I've accumulated in my career to ensure that I'm helping advance a Canada where human rights are respected and where we can speak out for the things that we believe in. And so long as I am able to speak out and I continue to listen to what community members are telling me and what I'm hearing, I will continue to do that. But again, it's imperative that our communities understand that it's not one office, not one level of government, not one minister or prime minister. This is all of us. We all have to work together to raise awareness, to engage, and to push for a Canada that is equitable and fair for everyone.
Okay, let's talk about the guide that I'm sure your office has spent a lot of time and energy working on, the Canadian Guide to Understanding and Combating Islamophobia. You mentioned a little bit about what it does. Can you tell us a little bit of, the guide itself is an important one, but is it being used? And how do we make sure that it's actually used as a tool in the places where some of these, this Islamophobia is being perpetrated, whether it's in the school environment, in the workplaces? When we talk about Islamophobia, it's not just hateful attacks on the street. It can happen in institutions as well.
Absolutely. And I think that point, Janelle, that you're making is actually what I really hope your viewers really take to heart. We don't want to wait until people are attacked in the streets, like just happened in Ottawa, in my hometown, a few days ago, where a young woman was on the bus and a man started yelling Islamophobic slurs and then slapped her in the face. And no one took any action to stop that or apprehend him. He got off the bus. Afterwards, 2 Muslim women are the ones who, one asked the bus driver to stop and make sure that witness statements were taken. And another woman kind of consoled the victim, who I've spoken to her mother. I can tell you that she is absolutely devastated. She's afraid to go on the bus. She's part-time public servant and a student. I can tell you that she is absolutely traumatized and frightened. And it's in a neighborhood actually that I used to live very nearby. So I can tell you, we don't want to wait for that. And that's part of why this guide was so important for us to get out there. We want to work with institutions. This guide is not for Canadian Muslims. This is actually for fellow Canadians. Polling has showed us that half of Canadians have said they want to be allies to Canadian Muslims, but they say they need resources. They need to understand how to combat those stereotypes that you see every day online. The trolls are there. Those ideas are there. I receive messages on a daily basis, as I'm sure your viewers can imagine, that just recycle old tropes, old stereotypes. So our allies want help. They want to do training in their workplaces. They want to equip teachers and educators with the information they need. And so this is why this guide has been so valuable. And to your point about, is it being used? I actually just the other day, someone from NCCM actually said to me, you know what, I was in a meeting with members of parliament or MPPs, and people were bringing your guide into those meetings and talking about them. So it's only been a few months that the guide has been out. I'm really hoping for this coming school year that I already started hearing from Palestinian parents that they're going to be using it to reference the recognition of anti-Palestinian racism that's described there, that parents, that educators, and anywhere that people are worried about discrimination, that they're going to use this guide to preemptively, proactively engage to do the necessary education. Will that weed out the hate? Not necessarily. But what we're trying to do here is build that allyship and that strength so that when we see hatred, when we see discrimination, that we have a plan. We have a plan to address it together, and that we are doing that education. Final point I want to mention, when you look at hate crime statistics, over a 10-year period, Statistics Canada found that a significant number were perpetrated by young boys between the ages of 12, boys and youth, so 12 to 25. So what's happening with young boys, for example, with youth, that they are, feeling the need to commit acts of hate. We need to think about, how are we ensuring that we are creating a society where these dangerous narratives are not taking root and potentially radicalizing people to do us harm? That is the most basic public safety service that we could do. But again, there's so many layers, and I really do invite people to take a look at the guide and see how they could use it in their own spaces.
I want to bring Khalid El-Khazaz into the conversation. He's with the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council. A lot of the work that Amira is doing, coincides and crosses over with advocacy work that CMPAC is doing. You've been listening in on the conversation. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges and gaps when it comes to structural and systemic Islamophobia in Canada?
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you, Amira, for this important conversation. Islamophobia is a reality that our community is facing, and and to the highest level of government have acknowledged that Islamophobia exists, Islamophobia is real, and as we've seen, Islamophobia kills. And at this point, the collective interest of everyone is actually to try to understand the root causes of Islamophobia. And I think this is the biggest gap. We address Islamophobia at the final stage when it is too late. And unfortunately, the performances of governments throughout the previous government, and so far we haven't seen much different in this new government, has been more on the PR performative level. In the PR, in where basically it is a verbal acknowledgement. It is attempts to show that we understand and acknowledge, which is an important step. However, we don't see much work on the different levels that address the root causes of Islamophobia. Root causes of Islamophobia are deeply entrenched into the system and into the structure. And there are studies into this by U of T and other interested researchers that basically document the anti-terrorism framework that basically was formulated and grew viciously post 9/11. This framework is never addressed, is never acknowledged, is not in these guides or these acknowledgements of Islamophobia, even though Prime Minister Trudeau in the Islamophobia summit post the London attack acknowledged that there is structural Islamophobia within the CRA, for example. However, no significant action was taken with the CRA after that, and this is what we mean: that the actual actions that require policy change, that requires public education, that requires dealing with the root causes, is actually not seriously addressed. And this is the reason why CMPAC and other organizations exist, actually, to look into deep structural issues, deep systemic issues that require legislative change, require policy change, and require real acknowledgement of the bureaucracy itself of these structural issues and serious attempts to change. So far, we do not see anything on this level.
Amira, to Khalid's point about policy change, can you point to any changes that have come as a result of your office? I mean, this is an office with a $5 million budget, nearly $200 million going into Canada's anti-racism strategy. Have we seen the results of any of that in terms of policy change?
Yeah, so first of all, just directly to the point around the charities file. So in fact, in my readout of my meeting with the Prime Minister Carney a few weeks ago, I mentioned that we did raise that topic and we had that discussion. He has made a commitment as well to address the concerns that communities have made about bias at the CRA. And I can tell you that for the past year or more, our office has actually been engaged on that policy file. And in fact, Khalid and CMPAC have been part of those conversations, as has the National Council of Canadian Muslims, Professor Anwar Iman, and other experts. So we have actually been engaged. I think one of the challenges that we have is that policy does take time. And so that's often difficult to kind of communicate to our communities, is that, I do believe that there is a real commitment to address that structural issue, particularly on that file. We had the commitment from Prime Minister Carney. We're working on it actually and preparing to provide like the full sort of advice to the government. But then we can't drop the ball. We have to ensure that our communities continue to say we are looking for the results. The proof will be in the pudding. Absolutely. And so I think on those deeper policy issues, I think I would also just want to add as well, like our budget is just over 7 million over 5 years and then 2.1 million ongoing. May sound like a lot of money, but in fact, if you look at the overall, for example, anti-racism strategy, which is in over $100 million, it's actually quite a small drop in the bucket. And it means that at the major basic level, we have about 4 or 5 people in our office dealing with a huge demand on our time and attention, whether it's the Gaza temporary program, whether it is CRA issues, whether it's, talking to Sudanese Canadians who have been also feeling very let down for how they've been able to bring their loved ones here, whether it's talking about raising the public awareness. Like, I can go on. The list is very long in terms of all that we have been engaged on. And again, I really do want your viewers to visit our website and see all the work we've been doing. But the bottom line is that it does take time. We're now entering, I'll be entering the 3rd year of this office. It took time to set up as well. So I think that on the one hand, the urgency has never felt more immediate that we want to address systemic Islamophobia. But the challenge is that it takes time, it takes a lot of work. And why our office is so unique and so valuable is that we are able to navigate the bureaucracy, make sure that our communities are talking to the right officials. And that's not something we had before this office to that extent. And so I think that we're starting to really leverage that. And on that key policy changes that our communities have asked for, I really hope that we will soon see some important advancement.
While we're talking about policy, I just want to quickly bring up Bill C-63, the online harms bill. Can you talk a little bit about how it intersects with, protecting targeted communities?
Yeah, I mean, the online harms bill is a really important one in terms of understanding that what we see radicalizing young people and people like the terrorists, the killers in Quebec City or in London, Ontario, is that online space that in Canada is not regulated. And so there are no guardrails. And as we know, and what we've seen in the trends out of the US is now platforms like Meta, X, whatnot, there's very little moderation. So hate is proliferating. It's putting us all at risk, because what it means is that more and more and more people are receiving misinformation, disinformation, not only about Muslims, but about many others. We also know about foreign interference. The Canadian government actually raised concerns with the government of Israel over an Islamophobic campaign that was targeting Canadians last year. And so we know that there are a variety of ways in which our communities could be targeted and Islamophobia spread online. And so we have to wait and see now if this new government is going to pick up that legislation and reintroduce it. And there have been discussions about whether it's going to be in the current form or not. But I think it is an imperative, again, not only for Canadian Muslims, but all vulnerable communities that are targeted online and who do face more and more hate, including young people who see more hate than many of us because they're so frequently online.
Khaled, I know there's some diverse views of opinion when it comes to the online harms bill and maybe concerns about how it could be weaponized against communities to silence them. What's your take?
Yeah, so this is a perfect example actually of how that performative politics is not adequate. So the initial intent of an Online Harms Act addresses what Amira is talking about with regards to protecting communities from hate online. However, interestingly, the proposed legislation included unnecessary changes to the Criminal Code Act and the Human Rights Charter. So the entire civil society organizations unanimously put out letters and statement basically declaring that this is an unacceptable legislation. It basically scales up any potential violation into a lifetime sentence. It has a precondition basically to judge people even prior to, with the intent of committing acts of hate crime. It goes beyond basically a simple legislation that was supposed to address online harms to effectively even securitize and intimidate, and can be misused, especially in a pro October 7th context where pro-Palestinian protests are being targeted or attempted to be stopped. So really, we see legislation, intended legislation to limit our civil liberties.
So just post October 7th, the context you meant, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, Amir, I mean, I think it's important then for people to be engaged on these conversations and to understand the nuances, the pros and cons of some of these policies.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, Janella. Like, I think the key point here is, look, even being able to have a conversation like this, we're all coming at this from a place of privilege. Most Canadian Muslims, like most Canadians, are just trying to live their lives, trying to like pick up their kids after school, trying to put food on the table. These are very, very complicated, sometimes, discussions that require a very strong and robust civil society space. And so for our communities, it's actually wonderful to see the growth and maturation of our communities, whether it's all the various organizations that many of your viewers will be engaged on or listening to or sending emails on behalf of, et cetera. Like, we need to ensure that we have a strong civil society, which is going to make all of this more relevant to people's lives, in the sense of they will tell people, okay, now's the time to write, a quick letter to your member of parliament on this topic or that topic, right? So they're doing all the hard work for people. They are examining legislation. They are looking at the policies. They can know that our office is listening as well and making sure that to the mandate that we are providing the advice to the federal government to ensure that policies that are proposed or even in place at the moment, that if they're harming our communities, that we are raising that alert and that we are going to be working with the officials to ensure that whatever harm may come about, that we're mitigating that in advance and or undoing harm that exists. And I want to just take a moment about, of course, the post 9/11 era. Like, one of the things that has been really, really disturbing and alarming in the post October 7th time that we're in over the past 2 years, and what we see in that Palestine Exception report, is that these types of tropes about our communities have been supercharged, turbocharged. Our young people have been absolutely just shocked, dismayed, traumatized, not only by what they're seeing on their screens on a daily basis with the ongoing horrors that's happening to Gazans, but they're also very frightened of the consequences of speaking out against injustice. And all of us, whether we're young or old, want to live in a country where you have the freedom to speak, you have the freedom to protest, you have the freedom to participate, to exercise your civil liberties. And what we have seen is a silencing and an effort to smear our communities as being sympathetic to terrorism, when it couldn't be further away from the truth. Our communities are standing up for international humanitarian law and are demanding that for our people here in Canada and abroad. And so I think what's really important is that what we are seeing in these narratives, they are going to potentially influence public policy. And that's what we have to guard against. We have to make sure that any conversations about well-being, about safety, about belonging are taking into consideration the fact that our communities have often been seen as the other, as the dangerous fifth column. And that continues to happen online spaces with people, with platforms. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're not only engaging ourselves, but that we're supporting the civil society organizations that are also watching out for that and doing everything they can to stop those negative consequences.
The last question for you is, Amira, do you think you've been able to achieve what you set out to do? Did all of this, turn out to be maybe more difficult than you anticipated, whether it's personally, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that you've been the personal subject of attacks and that your office is constantly, attacked in the media, but also even just getting the work done, getting the day-to-day work done, having the resources that you need to do the work that needs to be done. How are you feeling this far in?
Well, I can tell you that it's definitely nothing like what I expected it to be. I actually thought I would be spending the most amount of time just dealing with policy, and that, I would take on this role. No one would hear from me from 4 years. I would just be working with the bureaucracy, working on policy, engaging, of course, with community, but really just kind of, getting down to the brass tacks. Like, what do we need to change? Obviously, over the past 2 years, the threats to our civil liberties, the threats to our social belonging and well-being, the threat to our civil liberties, religious freedoms, etc., are beyond what I ever expected or anticipated. And so it has certainly been a huge challenge to ensure that this office continues to have the trust of our communities, to be credible, to be producing and reports and information and supporting the public discourse in ensuring that Canadians understand what our communities are going through right now, and that policymakers and decision makers understand that as well, and that we are part of the solution to, again, ensuring that our shared values are upheld.
Did you have a final point you wanted to make? You looked like you wanted to jump in.
Yes, no, I just want to really share with Amira and yourself and our viewers that our community's expectations on combating Islamophobia does not stop at the Islamophobia office. The expectations from our community is to see genuine interest and genuine desire and political will to make a change, to make a difference. This is what we do not see, unfortunately, and we do not see clearly. There are multiple avenues to address Islamophobia at the root cause. It starts from education. It starts from acceptance of this and educating at all levels, specifically within the structure and within the system. It is shocking when you see that in the same year or in the same couple of years, a very different reaction, a discriminatory reaction from the visa situation of the Ukrainians than the Palestinian Canadian. It is shocking to see the discrepancy. Hundreds of thousands on this side accepted immediately And then we talk about 4 or 5,000, only a few hundred being accepted. It is very deep and entrenched into the system, this Islamophobia. So the genuineness should mean real transparency on what actions are being taken, and on the education level, and then on policy change level. And then finally, if the government is serious about actually making this office meaningful to the community and impactful for the community, it should give it a little bit more authority and more mandate to do things, not just study and be a bridge, but actually to take action and to be able to engage in serious policy change. This is really our expectation. And we want to see Amira succeed in a bigger and a broader role through this office.
We could probably continue this conversation for hours, but we will have to leave it there. Khalid Al-Qazaz, the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council, Amira Al-Kawabi, the Special Representative combating Islamophobia to the government, Canada's first ever Special Representative on combating Islamophobia. I did get it right. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time. And thank you for being with us on this candid conversation. Muslims in Canada, of course, wanting safety, accountability, and end to Islamophobia and discrimination. So the conversation, as you heard, doesn't end here. There's a lot of work to be done by the community as well. Thanks so much for watching Power and Policy. This is a podcast by the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council. I'm Janelle Massa. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay empowered. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for watching.